Morning, guys. This is, I think, October 27th, and this is our first real snow of the year. You can see the little hotbed greenhouse behind me. We left the plastic off. I don't care. A lot of times you go into spring thinking this is going to be so exciting. This year, I'm going to do it all. I'm going to do the spring garden, the summer garden, the winter garden. Oh, I missed one. The fall garden. I'm going to do it all. And then you get into canning season and dehydrating season, and you're like, why won't my garden just die? Just let it end. Let it be over. So here I am in front of my hotbed greenhouse. And I have parsley and celery and tomatoes. We've had lots and lots and lots of frost and we've never covered it. The heat from the hotbeds keeps everything from freezing. The tomatoes were still going strong, but a good snow will take them out for you. So I have been in a bit of a fog, a bit of a funk over the garden, over the hotbeds, over all of the food growing systems that I have ever since I built this. The reason for that was this worked really, really well. I really liked it, and it was easy to use. It was so inexpensive. Hold my camera while the dogs go past. It was so inexpensive. It cost me less than $100 to do this whole greenhouse. Loved it. It's not as delicate as my big, tough greenhouse. My tough greenhouse, I have to go thump it. I have to dig all the snow away from it when we have a really good snow, because the snow will literally crush it. Not the metal parts of it, but the plastic. With this one, I come out and I just tap it like that in the winter, and all the snow just cascades off. The bottom is made out of pellets, so there's nothing to crush in. If we have a really high wind, this is not the least bit affected. It's got 1 ton of compost in each hotbed. There's 2 hotbeds here. Each one has 1 ton of compost in it. It's not moving. It's not going anywhere. This one doesn't even have T-posts in it to anchor it because the compost anchors it, and I built it really sturdily. I think I built this one in 2019. I built that one in 2018 and that one in like 2013. And so they've stood the test of time. I know they're worth building. However, what I want is for them to be more aesthetically pleasing, and I want them to last even longer than these ones have. I have now built 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I've now built 9 hotbeds since I started building hotbeds in 2013. And what I have found is that I really like to just use 100% pellets. I don't like to use the long pieces of just dimensional lumber on the sides. I don't like to do that. What happens is the corners come under too much stress because the corners where the dimensional lumber is attached to the pallets is under, that is the only anchor. And so does it hold it up for years and years and years? Yes, but it starts to bow out. It bows. The dimensional lumber can't hold 1 ton of compost as it sinks without bowing out a little bit. Now, if you use pallets on the side and you don't reinforce them with something, they will also bow out, the pallets themselves. And that's what happened in the big greenhouse. I want to make sure that I've got audio on this. All right, sorry about that. I had to check and make sure I had audio. This is one I don't want to miss. I don't want to not have all the information I'm trying to give you. So I can show you one. So I'm going to see if I can set this up in a way that the dogs can't knock it over as they run past, but you can also see what I'm talking about. So this bed, the sides are also pallets. So the ends are pallets, but the sides are also pallets. And the way that I reinforced them was with a long 2x4 along the side. That's just one 2x4 attached all the way along the side. And then I also have a T-post I also have T-posts on the long side where it's so long I was concerned that it was not going to be able to keep from bowing out. Third year for this hotbed. It is bowing out. If I had put in one more T-post on each side, it would not have bowed out. But again, unless you have inside support, these corners are holding all the weight. Let's see if I can show you these corners. The kitty will be very helpful. So this blue thing, this is an exhaust 2-inch hose that they use for water. We use it for our irrigation system, and once they get brittle, I just put a washer and a screw in the corners, and I use it to hold the hotbeds together. It works better than screws, and it works better than those metal elbows that I used to use, because this one you can take apart from the outside. Okay, the other thing that I improved with this bed was that I lined it with an old tarp. Instead of using, Kitty, you are so helpful. Okay, the other thing that was a little difficult with these hotbeds, so these hotbeds are lined on the inside with tin, and some of the tin is bent around a corner. So in order for me to get this apart, I either have to dig all the compost out and get in there and unscrew it, or I have to use a crowbar and break tin and ruin screws. I always reuse my screws. I reuse all my parts. And so one of the reasons these guys are still here is because I didn't want to ruin supplies having to use a crowbar, but when I put it together, it didn't occur to me that I shouldn't put all the screws on the inside. All right, with these little puppies, what they're lined with is old tarps. After I have a tarp that's nice over hay in the winter, the next spring I use it to line my hotbeds. The nice thing about these is because there's no screws on the inside, it's being held together with these blue hoses that are screwed in. Also, when I first built them, I just built them with baling twine. The hose was an afterthought. I'll try and get in here and show it to you. See? See how that's held together? So originally all these beds were held together with baling twine, and it totally worked. It just was not a big deal. This one down here is still only held together with baling twine. And this one is shorter. This one is shorter. You can see it's only 8 feet long. I do not have any T-posts or any support system holding it in, but because it's not real long, it doesn't need it. I just have that 2x4 there. Sorry, kitty. I have that 2x4 there across the 2 pallets to hold the 2 pallets in. And then baling twine, you see this one is pushed out just a tiny bit, but it's still holding together. See that? No T-posts in this one. This one is a third again as long as that one. And so it bowed. You can see the bow right there, the bow. So, this is my perennial bed. It's actually self-seating annuals, but I'm going to call it my perennial bed because I'm not going to plant anything new in it. So this is a temperate basil. It's called Tulsi Kapoor, and it came back from last year. The trick with hotbeds is if they're not in a greenhouse, they have to stay open to the elements. So if I'm going to make a greenhouse with them, that's all great and good. But if I want to put something in it that I want to self-seed and come up super early in the spring, I have to leave it open to the elements, because as it snows and as it rains, it will water the bed. If I put plastic over it, it'll cook everything, it'll dry out, and when it's time in the spring for things to come up, they won't come up at the right time. So they have to have snow, they have to have rain. We're not going to water them with the soaker hoses anymore. It's time for me to disconnect all my soaker hoses. I can leave them in place, put a little baggie over the end so I'm not getting dirt or anything in it, and then leave it for spring. So the other things I have in here are alpine strawberry, ground cherry, Swiss chard, clover. I think I might have some onions in here too. This other one had Swiss chard, lettuce, all sorts of things in it, but it's sinking really, really fast. This one didn't have rabbits on it. This hotbed never got recharged by rabbit manure or rabbit urine. We never put the cages on top and let the rabbits just sit here. So this one is not sinking. It's full of sawdust, and we added a little bit of rabbit manure, but the rabbits never lived on top of it. This one, the big one, it had rabbits on top of it for a very long time, and it has sunk by half. So now I'm going to tell you what my big plan is that has taken me 6 months. No, what are we? Almost 11 months to think of. All right, so my plans are, I want to turn the whole backyard into just my regular row garden. I have run out of money, I have run out of energy, and I have just run out of hands at home to help with our big row garden in the front. We've had the sheep up there, we've had the goats up there, and it doesn't matter what I do, it's not enough animals to really put down mulch and manure in the amount we need for a 5,000 square foot garden. If I had cows and I just fed them, I would have enough. But with a few sheep and a few goats, it's just not enough. They just can't compete with that kind of space. So rather than wearing myself out, hitting myself against a brick wall, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to come in and I'm going to cut down my living fence. I'm going to take out my hotbeds, and I'm going to take down the hotbed that's in the big greenhouse. And what I'm going to do with that is have the big greenhouse that is not this guy, that's not the hotbed greenhouse. I'm going to take my tough greenhouse and turn it into my early spring garden where I'm putting in peas and things like that. And then I'll have the hotbed next to it, the big hotbed greenhouse, for my late winter, January planting plants. And that will allow me to rotate between seasonality and ease and keep it all closer to the house. All right, for those of you who saw the low pallet beds, the ones where the pallet lays on the ground and the spaces in between are where you plant, for those of you who saw that, it works great. It works really, really well. And because I want to set things up on my automatic watering system, I'm not going to use them that way next year. So I have all of my little beds that were that we stapled fabric to and filled with rabbit manure and soil. I have them all stacked up so they don't have weeds growing in them or anything like that. And if I get a hankering to plant into them next year, I can, but I'm not anticipating that I'm going to. What I'm doing instead is just getting them out of the way and looking at what I want to do with the backyard to make it a better food system. It may not be as cottagey looking, but I'm trying really hard not to be as concerned about appearances as I am about whether or not it actually creates food. And so these guys don't really fit into my automatic watering system. Kaya has to water them by hand every day. I can't water in the summer because I can't get bit or scratched by plants or anything like that. So my work is not necessarily garden work in the summer, and this is too much work for the girls. So even though it worked, it just didn't fit in the system, and so we need to let it move on. All right, this is my living fence. Down that way, that way. This here also used to be a living fence, but it wasn't thriving as well as the other two. And so instead I put my rain tree fruit nursery here. But this still isn't really necessarily feeding us very well. It's beautiful and it's fun and it adds depth to the backyard. But what I want more than that is a food system that's easy to use. And so I think what we're gonna do is once I have the hotbed built, back there by the other greenhouse, I'm going to cut my living fence all the way down, take all the wood out of it, and fill up the hotbed with the living fence. That does make me sad because when we first moved here, it was like the first thing that I did is I went out and harvested riverbank willows and stuck them in the ground and kept them watered until they came to life. I think they're beautiful. But I have so much, the reason I did that was to add depth and somewhere for the ducks to have shade because we didn't have anything planted back here when we first moved here. I was worried about my poultry dying of heat stroke in the backyard. Since then, we have filled it in. There's lots of places for these ducks to have shade, and I would prefer to water plants that give us food, and the willows don't do that. They feed the rabbits, trimmings and everything like that, but in the summer when they're growing, I have so many other sources of food for the rabbits that I just need to look at my management sheet, my balance sheet, and say, willows are wonderful, but they're not as wonderful as some of my other plants, and so I need to take them out and make life a little easier for myself. So those will come out, this will come out, and I'm gonna run the goats in here as soon as I have that finished. And the reason for that is so that as I feed them, they can manure the space, they can eat the weeds, and the hay they don't eat gets laid down as mulch on top so that it can prepare all of this garden space for me to use for the annual garden for next year. All right, this is the place where I want to put the hotbed greenhouse, is right there. So we need to move the goose / duck house over here so that I have that space to build in, and it will be right next to the other greenhouse, and that way instead of having many different types of greenhouses all over the place, I'll have the only greenhouses I have right next to each other. All right, this is the hotbed inside our tough greenhouse, and the only thing that I've done for this is I have put plastic back up in the back so that we don't have a cold wind blowing through. I have not even closed the door for this greenhouse, so I was not trying to save it. It has totally, it's still trying to hold on. Like, this is a lettuce, or not a lettuce, this is a celery, a Chinese celery, and a lot of things in here are still alive, and that's fine, but I'm not pushing for it. For those of you who are frustrated with the fact that I'm not like holding on to more food and trying to grow more, you really do get to a point in the season where you just don't care, especially if you already planted too much. If you planted too much, you've already burned yourself out. And I do that every year. I have multiple greenhouses going, I have gardens in different spaces going, and if you do too many things in too many different spots, you just burn yourself out, and that's what I did. So what I need to do now, my big priority to get ready, to get this space ready, I hear you, I will come. In order to get this space ready for the next stage, I need to get all the hoses put up. I need to pull the hoses out of this bed because I want to take it out. This is one that I want to show you that it bowed out on one side. I didn't use any T-posts on this one. And you're not going to be able to tell. This is nettles. I grow nettles in my greenhouse. So I have lathe across the top to hold the sides in, and it does a pretty good job. And maybe you can't see it from here, but this side is bowed out just a little bit, which is not fantastic, but it just doesn't really matter.